cut across state to these live visuals coming in from New York. The crucial India-Japan-US meeting set to begin. India's External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj meeting with her American and Japanese counterparts. A host of issues on the table. These are live visuals that we're getting to you from New York. Remember, the External Affairs Minister of India, Sushma Swaraj, had arrived in New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly session, as a part of which a lot of diplomatic talk which is on the table, including meetings with as far as 20 bilateral meetings with several leaders that are on the agenda. These are visuals of dignitaries arriving earlier for the United Nations General Assembly session. Foreign Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj has met with the US Secretary of State just a few moments ago. On your screens are the live visuals that we got for you just a short while back as well. The visuals that we got to you of External Affairs Minister of India, Sushma Swaraj, meeting her American and Japanese counterparts for that crucial meeting. One, of course, among the various bilaterals and trilaterals which are in store as a part of the External Affairs Minister's UNGA trip, as a result of which there will be a host of issues on agenda ranging from counter-terrorism to UN reforms, also climate change and peacekeeping. The crucial meeting between India's External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and her American and Japanese counterparts to begin. The leaders here stopping for a brief photo opportunity here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sit down now.
Sushma Swaraj will be meeting her American and Japanese counterparts Rex Tillerson and Tara Kono in just a short while from now in a crucial trilateral. She will also be participating in a high-level meeting on UN reforms hosted by the US and chaired by US President Donald Trump. She will be addressing the UNGA on September 23rd. She, remember, arrived earlier to represent India at the annual United Nations General Assembly session. During her week-long stay, the minister will be holding about 20 bilateral and trilateral meetings with leaders attending the session. She was earlier received at the airport by the Indian ambassador to the US, Navtesh Sarna, and also India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Saeed Akbaruddin. A crucial bilateral coming at a time when the North Korean missile threat is escalating. United States, Japan and India, remember, have issued a number of statements through various leaders as a result of the continuous threat that's been coming in from Pyongyang. Let's go across to our correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran, who's also been tracking the very latest, now joining us from the international desk for more on this. Ramesh, what are you picking up and what is expected to be on the table when this crucial trilateral begins in just a few moments from now? Apart from North Korea, that of course is going to be an issue which is expected to be discussed.
Indeed, remember, this is the third India-US-Japan trilateral that's taking place on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York. The inaugural trilateral happened in 2015, and this would be the third edition of the trilateral, as I said. This time we have a new Japanese foreign minister in Taro Kono, who just took over as the foreign minister in Tokyo. That said, this would be the first official meeting, remember, between Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj and her US counterpart Rex Tillerson. Although Prime Minister Modi has met with President Trump in Washington, the foreign ministers of the two countries have been meeting for the first time on the margins of the UNGA. And after the photo opportunity that we just saw moments ago, the three leaders will be sitting down for delegation-level talks in which one can expect the leaders to discuss bilateral regional and global issues of concern to all three countries. But the focus from Japanese side can be expected to be firmly on the issue of the threat posed by the tensions on the Korean peninsula, especially in light of the North Korean nuclear test and the ballistic missile tests in recent weeks. From India's perspective, one can expect India to raise the issue of terrorism, and the evergreen issue of the Indo-Pacific security can be expected to figure dominantly in their discussions in New York as we speak.
And as far as Sushma Swaraj's engagements are concerned, as many as 20 bilateral and trilateral meetings on the table. It's of course going to be a few days of super diplomacy on part of the foreign minister there, Ramesh. Apart from the North Korean issue, of course, what else are we expecting in terms of counter-terrorism? That of course is going to be a dominant issue during most of those meetings, isn't it?
Indeed, Molly, this year's 72nd session of the UNGA, one can expect India to continuously harp on the issue of terrorism and the threats posed by terrorism emanating especially from Pakistani soil and that which is directed against India in particular. Remember, last year we saw Sushma Swaraj similarly address the UNGA, in which India called out Pakistan for supporting and aiding and abetting terror networks operating against India. That address happened soon after, in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack at Uri, and to my mind that was a watershed moment in India's diplomatic engagements throughout the last several years, in fact. And this year one can expect the same conversation, the same language formulation to continue into Ms. Swaraj's address on the 23rd evening India time when she addresses the UNGA. But that said, the instant meeting between and among India, US and Japan, Molly, can be expected to focus on regional issues, especially the security architecture obtaining in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in light of China's aggressive, some would say overly aggressive behavior with respect to some of its neighbors, namely Philippines or Vietnam or even Japan and South Korea in the East Asia and the South China Sea issues. Clearly, many other issues can be expected to focus of the trilateral meeting as we speak in New York.
Right, and Ramesh, this meeting of course assumes significance given the North Korean threat, but also important to highlight here that just a few hours ago, United States exerting pressure on India to scale down ties with North Korea, the kind of threat that of course the entire region is faced with, specifically Japan. To what extent do we see the fact that India is under pressure to actually be of significance, the kind of pressure that the United States has been trying to exert on India?
Clearly, Molly, if there's one issue on which there is convergence between and among India, the US and Japan, that would be North Korea. Remember, India has issued at least a couple of statements in recent weeks on the issue of North Korea. And in every one of those statements, India has pointed out some countries' complicity in North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs without any reference to Pakistan. The inference was there for all to see. Remember, Pakistan, the A.Q. Khan, who is known as the father of the Pakistani nuclear program, is known to have helped the North Korean nuclear program and indulge in the nuclear black market, as it were. So clearly there are a lot of connections between Pakistan and North Korea, and India is overly aware of the security concerns posed by the proliferation activities. So clearly India is seeing this as a proliferation issue, but from Japanese perspective, Molly, Japan sees it as an existential threat to itself and the US in particular. Remember, the latest ICBM, the intercontinental ballistic missile tested by Pyongyang, has the reach to hit the American mainland, especially cities far across as Chicago. So clearly, it is a threat, no doubt, for the Americans as well. And we've seen in recent times a heightened rhetoric from Washington and the Trump administration. Remember, Trump has spoken about phrases such as fire and fury, locked and loaded. And Pyongyang, in return, has responded in kind, in a sense, and threatened to sink Japan and reduce the US to ashes and darkness. So clearly, there's no let-up on the rhetoric front, but moves are afoot to at least begin to have a kind of back-channel talks, as it were, on diffusing the crisis on the Korean Peninsula. But it remains to be seen how the US administration fashions its response in the weeks ahead.
Also, vis-a-vis China flexing its muscles in the region, that of course is something that also is of particular interest to each of these three countries, Ramesh, given the kind of pressure that China also comes under repeatedly for not exerting its influence in the way that it should on Pyongyang.
Indeed, what we have been able to decipher in the last few weeks, Molly, is that the Americans want China to do more, to lean on Pyongyang, to make it desist from continuing its nuclear program, its ballistic missile tests. And in recent weeks, we've seen China and Russia come more or less on the same page on the issue of North Korea. Vladimir Putin of Russia in particular has been very critical of the American desire for fresh sanctions on Pyongyang and the regime of Kim Jong-un. In recent times, we've seen the UN Security Council come out with fresh sanctions on the regime of Pyongyang. And we've seen Americans water down their draft resolution in deference to the wishes of China and Russia in particular. Remember, Putin in particular has said that sanctions are futile and that North Korea can be expected to continue its nuclear and missile tests even at the expense of international condemnation. So clearly, the onus now is on the Americans to fashion their next response or reply to Pyongyang's provocations. And if the past is an indicator, Trump can be expected to open some kind of dialogue going forward. But when, where and how, we don't know yet.
Right. Before we let you go, Ramesh, one other aspect of how Sushma Swaraj is also expected to come face to face with her Pakistani counterpart Khwaja Asif at the UNGA. Any confirmation or any word coming in on if at all there is a sit-down that is expected between the two leaders?
Well, Molly, when the Indian foreign minister visits the UNGA, she is expected to hold bilateral and multilateral meetings on the margins of the UNGA. We saw that happen last year as well, and this year would not be any exception either. Now, Ms. Swaraj can be expected to hold and attend a meeting of the SAARC countries in which India and Pakistan are members. And by the same extension, she can be expected to hold a meeting with her Pakistani counterpart within the rubric of the SAARC Council of Ministers meeting in New York. But that said, her meeting with Pakistani Prime Minister Shahiz Khaqan Abbas is unlikely, although she may meet with her Pakistani counterpart in Khwaja Asif, as I said, on the margins of the SAARC ministerial meeting in New York.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment, Ramesh. Appreciate those details coming in. We'll, of course, keep a close eye on the latest developments coming in from the crucial India-US-Japan meeting. All right, staying on with the latest coming in from that crucial India-US-Japan meeting. We got for you these visuals just a short while back of that photo opportunity of the three leaders. That meeting would be beginning in just a short while from now as Sushma Swaraj holds that crucial trilateral with her American and Japanese counterparts. This, of course, assuming significance at a time when the North Korean threat has been escalating. During her week-long stay, the External Affairs Minister of India is going to be leading a high-powered Indian delegation expected to hold about 20 bilateral and trilateral meetings with leaders attending this session. Let's go straight across to WION's senior editor, Surya Gangadharan, also joining us on the broadcast for more on this. Surya, what do you make of the timing of this crucial trilateral, of course, coming at a time when North Korean missile threat has only been escalating? Do we expect India to also come under more pressure from the United States when it comes to cutting off ties with Pyongyang?
Well, I don't think India requires to be brought under pressure because the current government has made it quite clear that they are backing the Western approach towards North Korea and they are cutting down on whatever limited trade there currently is. I think this meeting is also an opportunity for India to underscore some of its concerns about how the North is acquiring its strategic prowess, whether in terms of its launch of satellites or its missile testing or the engines it is getting for the missiles that it is launching, including the ICBM. The question here is, where is the technology for all this coming from? Is it coming from somewhere outside? Has the North developed it locally? That's a bit difficult to grasp because the North has been under sanctions for a long time. And it's not clear they have the capacity and the technologies and the expertise necessary to build the kind of complicated systems that are required to carry out these tests or even do those missiles. And there's also the question that there's a rocket propellant called UDMHL, which is used for powering rockets. Now, currently, I believe, China is the only country that makes it in large quantities, and there are a couple of European countries too. But one can presume that given the long history of association that the North and China has, some of this fuel is probably coming to the North.
Right, Surya, and taking a cue from what you just mentioned, and as I was just discussing with Ramesh there as well, China flexing its muscle in the region and the kind of pressure that has been exerted on China, but to no avail to actually pressurize Pyongyang. Do we expect that to also come up as a part of that discussion? All right, we'll just try and reconnect that audio line. But as we've been discussing all along, the kind of pressure that has come the way of China as a result of pressurizing Pyongyang. All right, we'll just go back to WION senior editor Surya Gagantharan joining us. Surya, as I was just mentioning, China has come under repeated criticism for not doing enough in order to pressurize Pyongyang. We've seen the kind of heightened rhetoric that's come the way from the leadership of Japan, US and China when it comes to the North Korean issue. Aside from the Pyongyang crisis, to what extent do we see the issues like trade, like climate change actually coming up? Or do we see North Korea dominating those talks?
I would presume that North Korea would dominate those talks. And if you just look back, we had the Japanese Prime Minister who was in Ahmedabad for 2 days. There were important meetings there with him and Prime Minister Modi. I'm not talking of the rail, the bullet train. I'm talking of other understandings on strategic issues. And these do coincide with the US perception also. So I would presume that there would be a discussion on North Korea, really focus on some of those points that India would like to raise, including the ones that I just mentioned. And the fact that there has to be a connection between North Korea's advances in nuclear and missile systems and the support it is giving from outside. I think that's one point that India would like to underscore.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment. Ramesh and Surya, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast with all of those details. We keep closely monitoring the leaders coming in.